I want to tell you what it feels like to see the word P light up on your husband's iPad screen at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in September, in the kitchen where you have made every dinner of your marriage for the last 41 years, and to read the 4 words that follow that letter. Can't wait to see you tonight, my love, my love. It feels like the floor has softly, quietly, without any noise at all, dropped 6 inches. That is the physical sensation. Your feet are still on the tile. The tile is still where the tile has always been. But the ground itself has moved in a way that is invisible to everyone else in the world, and you know instantly that it will never move back. My hands went cold. My heart began the specific slow, heavy hammering that I would later come to recognize as the sound of my life ending and my life beginning at exactly the same moment, in the same beat. David saw my husband of 42 years now was in the garage. He had told me 3 minutes earlier that he was going to Home Depot to pick up wood for a shelf he was building. He had left his wallet on the counter. He had left his iPad on the counter beside the wallet. And because I am a person who has never in my life snooped, because I trusted this man completely, because for 42 years I had believed our marriage was as solid as any marriage anywhere on this earth, meant I had not gone looking. I had simply glanced, and the message had appeared. Pater, which in David's contacts meant only one person. Pamela Jennings. My best friend of 27 years. Nadine, the woman whose daughter had gone to school with my daughter. The woman I had sat with in the hospital waiting room when my mother had her surgery. The woman whose husband, Richard, had been David's fishing companion for 18 summers. My love. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not do any of the things a woman does in the movies when she discovers something like this. I set the iPad back on the counter, face up, in the exact position I had found it. I picked up his wallet. I walked to the garage door. I opened it. I said, "David, you forgot your wallet." He turned. He was wearing the blue flannel shirt I had bought him for Christmas in 2017. He smiled the small, distracted, absent smile of a man who was thinking about something else. He said, "Oh, thanks, Care. Be back in an hour." I said, "David." He said, "Yeah?" I said, "Look at me." He looked at me. I said, "I would like you to come inside the house, and I would like you to tell me what has been going on with Pamela." His face did a specific thing. I have thought about that specific thing many times in the 5 years since. It was not surprise. It was not fear. It was, for exactly 1/4 of 1 second, relief. He came into the house. He confessed at the kitchen counter, standing beside the refrigerator where our grandchildren's drawings were held up with the little magnetic clips I had bought at Target in 2019. He had been sleeping with Pamela for 8 months. By the end of that Tuesday evening, I cried, before I had even eaten dinner, and I knew my marriage was over. 5 years later, I am sitting in a lakefront house with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. My business, which I run with Pamela's ex-husband Richard, is valued at just over $8.3 million. And Pamela and David, the 2 people who blew up 2 marriages and 2 friendships and 2 entire lives to be together, I knew are, as of last spring, no longer together at all. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Caroline Mitchell. I am 72 years old. For 30 years, I worked as a school secretary at Kent Ridge Elementary School in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I retired at 62, 6 years before all of this happened. I raised 3 children, Jennifer, Michael, and Amy, in a modest 4-bedroom colonial with a linden tree in the front yard that had grown over 4 decades. From a sapling I could touch the top of into a canopy that shaded the entire front porch. My husband David was an accountant at a mid-sized manufacturing firm. He was a quiet man. Not romantic, not particularly imaginative, but reliable. Cecil, I want you to hear that word, because in a moment it is going to become important. Reliable. David was reliable the way a good tool is reliable. You knew where he would be. You knew what he would say. You knew what he would want for dinner on Wednesday. I want to say something about David, because I do not want you to think he was a monster. He was not a monster. He was a decent, ordinary, middle-class American man who at the age of 68 made the specific kind of terrible decision that decent, ordinary, middle-class American men have been making for the entire history of decent, ordinary, middle-class American men. He got tired. He got restless. And a woman he had known for 27 years began, at some point in early 2019, to look at him differently. And he chose the look. I do not forgive him. I want to be clear about that. But I understand him. Understanding is not forgiveness. Understanding is what allows you to stop wasting your energy on hatred and start spending it on something more useful, like, for example, an $8.3 million business. I bjöd på en sänkning challenge. I 8.5 trader her well sumber. A 40 have 2 moffedwin point. I'd bjöd had buspelts. Listen to that, but I am getting ahead of myself. I want to tell you about Pamela. Pamela Jennings had been my best friend since October 12, 1992. I remember the date because it was a PTA meeting for our third graders, and it was 2 days before my daughter Jennifer's birthday, and I had brought cupcakes. Pamela had walked in wearing a pale pink cashmere sweater and cream trousers. In 1992, at a PTA meeting in a public elementary school gymnasium, she was wearing cashmere. She was carrying a small leather handbag. She had a manicure. She looked, I remember thinking, like someone who had walked into the wrong building by mistake. She sat next to me. She looked at my cupcakes. She said, "Oh, honey, did you make these? They are so precious." I liked her immediately. I want you to hear that sentence, because it is important. I liked her immediately, and for the next 27 years, I would continue to like her. I would sit with her. I would laugh with her. I would tell her things I did not tell my sister. I would let her hold my babies. I would go on vacations with her. I would trust her with my house key. And in all those 27 years, I did not once look at her and think, this woman will one day sleep with my husband, because I did not look at her that way. Because you don't look at your best friend that way. Because the whole point of a best friend is that you don't have to look at her that way. That's what makes it work. Pamela was a real estate agent, semi-retired by 2019. Her husband Richard ran a small commercial printing business. Business cards, brochures, promotional flyers. Nothing glamorous. They lived in a beautiful house in East Grand Rapids that they had bought in 1998 with money from Pamela's late father, who had been a successful cardiologist. Richard was. Don Mall is one of the kindest men I have ever met. He deserved better than what she did to him. We both deserved better than what they did to us. 3 days after the confession, David moved out. 3 days. 42 years of marriage, dismantled in 3 days. He packed his clothes, his golf clubs, his collection of vinyl records, the Miles Davis, the Coltrane, the early Springsteen, and he loaded it all into a U-Haul on a Friday afternoon while I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and pretending to read a newspaper. He came back inside once. He said, "Care, I'm sorry. I really am." I said, "David, I know." He said, "I never wanted to hurt you." I said, "David, I know that too." He said, "Pamela and I won were cobble." I said, "David, please stop talking." He left. For the next 2 weeks, I did not eat. I did not sleep. I lost 11 pounds. I sat in my bathrobe until 3 in the afternoon most days. I answered the phone only when my daughter Jennifer called. Jennifer had, when I told her what had happened, gotten in her car in Kalamazoo and driven 90 minutes to be with me. She stayed for a week. On the 4th night of her stay, over coffee at the kitchen table where David had confessed, Jennifer said, "Mom, Richard doesn't know." I said, "Sweetheart, I know. I've been thinking about it." Jennifer said, "Mom, he deserves to know." I said, "Jennifer, how do I tell that man that his wife has been sleeping with my husband?" Jennifer said, "The same way anyone tells anyone anything, you pick up the phone." I called Richard on a Sunday afternoon. He answered cheerfully. He said, "Caroline, are you and David free for dinner Thursday? Pam and I were talking about that new Italian place." I said, "Richard." He said, "Yeah?" I said, "Richard, I need to tell you something, and it is going to hurt." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. I was preparing to say his name again when he said, quietly, "Caroline, tell me." I told him. He was quiet for what felt like a long time. He said, 8 months. I said, "Yes." He said, "Caroline." I had no idea. I said, "I know, Richard." Neither did I. We talked for an hour and a half. That was the first phone call. There would be many more. The divorces happened quickly. David and Pamela both wanted it done. They were, from what I gathered later, already planning their new life. There was no fight. There was no counseling. There was no last-ditch attempt to save anything. Pamela and I split our respective assets. Unquote, David got half the retirement account. I got the house. I quote, and by March of 2020, 5 months after the confession, we were done. 6 months after David walked out of my kitchen, he and Pamela got married in a small courthouse ceremony in downtown Grand Rapids. I found out about it because my friend Linda sent me a screenshot from Facebook. Pamela had posted a photograph of herself and David signing the marriage license. Grinning, the caption read, "Beginning our new adventure together," followed by 6 heart emojis and a picture of a champagne glass. I stared at that photograph for a very long time. Then I closed my laptop. Then I cried for 3 days. Not because I still loved him. I do not know, honestly, whether I still loved him in that moment. But because for 42 years I had believed that the thing we had built together, quote, the reliable thing, the ordinary thing, was worth more than it apparently was. Because I had believed that 6 children between the 4 of us, and 27 years of Friday dinners, and a shared vacation cabin in Door County, and the memory of my mother's funeral where Pamela had held my hand, I had believed all of that was worth more than an 8-month affair between 2 bored 60-something-year-olds who had convinced themselves they were in love. I had believed my life was worth more than the story they wrote to end it. I cried for 3 days because I had been wrong about the currency. On the 4th day, my doorbell rang. Richard Jennings was standing on my porch. He was holding a bottle of red wine and a slightly weary expression. He said, "Caroline, I saw the Facebook post. I couldn't be alone tonight. I thought maybe you couldn't either." I said, "Richard, come in." We sat in my living room and we drank that bottle of wine. Then we opened one from my own cabinet. It was a Cabernet David had bought 2 years earlier that we had been saving for a special occasion. I decided this was one. Richard and I talked for 6 hours. We talked about the affair. We talked about our children. We talked about the mutual friends who had, since the divorce, quietly stopped calling us. We talked about the specific way that people at the grocery store looked at us with a pity we had never wanted. Around midnight, Richard said, "Caroline, I keep replaying our marriage in my head, trying to find the moment I failed her, trying to figure out what I did wrong." I said, "Richard, I've been doing the same thing." He said, "You didn't fail him, Caroline." I said, "Neither did you." He said, "They failed us." I said, "Yes." He said, "Caroline, my grandmother used to say something. She said, love isn't a feeling. Love is a house. You build it together, brick by brick, year by year. What Pamela and I had, Daya, what you and David had, were mine, that was built love. It was a house." He said, "What they have, what they think they have, were mine. That isn't a house. That's a hotel room." He said, "And you cannot live in a hotel room." I looked at him. I said, "Richard, I want you to remember that phrase, built love, because I think at some point in the next few years we are going to need it." He said, "Yes." We did not know, on that night, how right we were. Richard began coming over once a week. I want to be clear, it was not romantic. Neither of us wanted it to be romantic. Neither of us were capable, in those months, of feeling anything for anyone that was not sadness and rage. We were friends, wounded friends. And we sat on my back porch and drank wine and talked about the wreckage of our lives. 3 months into these evenings, in February of 2020, Richard mentioned, casually, that his printing business was in trouble. He said, "Caroline, digital marketing has killed traditional print. I don't have enough clients. I'm going to have to close by fall." I said, "Richard, what if you didn't close?" He said, "What?" I said, "What if you pivoted?" He said, "To what?" I said, "Give me a week. I have an idea." I had been reading during the long, quiet evenings after Richard would leave, because I could not sleep, and I had to fill the hours with something. I had been reading business articles online, not because I planned to start a business, I had no such plan. I was 68 years old, and I had never run anything more complicated than a school office. But I had been reading, because reading kept me from thinking about David. And in the course of that reading, I had come across 3 separate articles about a growing market personalized memory books, custom photo albums, legacy printing services for older adults who had a lifetime of photographs sitting in boxes in their basements and no idea how to preserve them. I called Richard the following Tuesday. I said, "Richard, come over. I have a proposal." He came over. I laid it out. Our generation, I said, has a specific problem. We have lived long, full lives. We have thousands of photographs. Some of them are in shoeboxes in our attics. Some of them are on old computers we no longer use. Some of them are in phones we do not know how to back up. Our children are too busy to help us organize them. Our grandchildren want to help but do not have the time. And we older Americans, we do not know how to do it ourselves. And we want, more than anything, to leave something behind. We want our grandchildren to know who we were. We want, when we are gone, for our stories to survive. I said, "Richard, what if we started a company that helps people do that? They send us their photographs. We help them organize them. We help them write captions, tell stories. We design beautiful books. You print them. High-quality archival paper. Professional binding. Something that will last for 4 generations." Richard was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Caroline, that is a very good idea." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you know anything about running a business?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you know anything about graphic design?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you know anything about marketing?" I said, "No." He said, "Are you willing to learn all 3?" I said, "Yes." He extended his hand across my kitchen table. He said, 50-50, equal partners. I shook it. We named the company Legacy Memories. I invested $15,000 from my divorce settlement. Richard mortgaged his printing shop to buy the new equipment. We were 68 and 69 years old. We had no business plan. We had no employees. We had no clients. And by year 5, we would be worth $8.3 million. The first 3 months were brutal. I want you to know that, because I do not want you to think this was easy. It was not easy. I stayed up until 2 a.m. most nights teaching myself graphic design from YouTube tutorials. Richard spent his days rewiring his shop for high-resolution photo printing. We did presentations at every senior center within 50 miles. We spoke at retirement communities. We put up posters in libraries. We built a website using a template. And it looked like a website built by 2 people who had never built a website before. Because it was. Our first client was a woman named Dorothy Kaufman. Dorothy was 73 years old. Her husband, Bill, had died 6 months earlier. She had 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and 11 cardboard boxes of photographs going back to 1971. She could not stop crying when she brought them to our tiny office. I sat with Dorothy at a folding table for 6 hours over 3 visits. I made her tea. I listened to her tell me about Bill. I helped her sort the photographs into chronological order. I helped her write captions. I helped her choose which pictures went to which child. When Richard delivered 5 leather-bound books to her house 4 weeks later, 1 for each of her children, Dorothy cried again. She held those books like they were her husband. She said, "Caroline, these are the most important things I have ever given my children. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." I drove home that afternoon. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. Because in helping Dorothy preserve her 48 years with Bill, I had, without meaning to, begun to preserve my own 42 years with David. Not the ending. The middle, the years and years and years of ordinary, imperfect, real life that had been ours. I could not hate all of that. Because if I hated all of that, I hated my own life. And I had decided, that afternoon, that I was not going to hate my own life. I was going to build a new one on top of it. Word spread the way word spreads in the retirement community world, which is to say by phone tree. Dorothy told 6 friends. Those 6 friends told 24 more. By the end of month 4, we had a waiting list. By the end of year 1, Legacy Memories had generated $180,000 in revenue. We had hired 2 part-time employees. We had moved out of Richard's shop into a small storefront on East Fulton Street. We were profitable. By the end of year 2, we had generated $650,000. We had 6 full-time employees and a dozen part-timers. I had learned graphic design well enough to run our production. Richard had upgraded our equipment twice. We had been featured in Grand Rapids magazine under the headline The Widow and the Ex-Husband, How 2 Retirees Built Michigan's Fastest-Growing Memory Business. The article had a photograph of Richard and me standing in our workshop, holding a leather album. Neither of us was smiling. We looked, in that photograph, like exactly what we were. 2 tired, dignified, careful people who had built something serious out of the wreckage of 2 failed marriages. The photograph went, in local terms, viral. By the end of year 3, we had signed our first national contract, unquote, a $2.4 million deal with a corporate senior living chain that owned 50,000 residential units across 15 states. We would provide legacy memory services to any resident who wanted one. We had to hire a chief operating officer. Her name was Melinda Chen, and she had left a corporate job at Herman Miller to come work for us. She was 39 years old, and she was, without exception, the smartest person I had ever met. By the end of year 4, our revenue had crossed $5 million annually. By the end of year 5, 6 months ago, a private equity firm approached us with an unsolicited offer to buy the company. Their valuation, based on our EBITDA and growth trajectory, $8.3 million. We turned it down. Because Richard and I had realized by then that we were not doing this for money. We were doing it because we had, without meaning to, without planning to, without believing it was possible. 9, we had built ourselves a life. I want to tell you about David and Pamela now, because I know you have been waiting for this part. I ran into them, the first time, about 18 months after their courthouse wedding. It was at a restaurant in downtown Grand Rapids. Richard and I were there celebrating our first 6-figure contract with a Michigan retirement chain. Melinda was with us. So was our graphic designer, a young man named Marcus. We were 4 people at a nice table by the window, drinking champagne. I saw them before they saw me. They were sitting in a corner booth. Pamela was talking. David was staring at his water glass. Pamela's hands were moving quickly, sharply, the way I remembered them moving when she was frustrated with Richard 20 years ago at Friday dinners. David's shoulders were doing the specific slump I had watched them do at every dinner party for 4 decades. The I am not enjoying myself, but I do not want to make a scene slump. But I do not want to make a scene slump. Then Pamela looked up and saw me. Her face went white. She leaned across the table. She said something urgent to David. He looked over. He froze. I looked at him. I did not smile. I did not glare. I did not do anything except look at him for exactly 3 seconds from 20 feet away. Then I turned back to my dinner companions. And I did what David had spent 42 years watching me do at ordinary tables in ordinary restaurants with ordinary people. I laughed at something Marcus said. I raised my glass. I toasted our success. Richard, quietly, on my left, said, "Caroline, that took real strength." I said, "Richard, that took healing." I heard, from mutual friends, over the following 2 years, that Pamela and David's marriage was not the paradise they had imagined. Pamela had expected David to be the man he had been during the affair. Attentive, romantic, secretive, exciting. But that was not David. That was David cheating. What she got, once she married him, was regular David. The man who fell asleep in his recliner by 8 p.m., who ate the same lunch every day, who did not remember anniversaries without a calendar reminder. David had expected Pamela to be the exciting woman he had chased, but once he had her, she stopped chasing. What he got was regular Pamela, high maintenance. Image-conscious, exhausting. They had, both of them, married a fantasy. They discovered they were living with a person. I did not celebrate this. I want to be clear about that. I did not throw a party. I did not send them a card, but I noticed. And I noticed, quietly, in the same way I had noticed the message on David's iPad 4 years earlier, that the universe has a way of settling its own accounts. David called me last spring. He had not spoken to me in over 3 years. He said, "Care." I said, "David, don't call me that." He said, "Caroline, I heard about your business. I heard you're doing very well. I'm really happy for you. I said, David, what do you want? He said, things haven't gone well with Pam. We're separating. I said, I heard. He said, I was wondering if if your business needed, maybe a part-time accountant. I still have my CPA. I could. I said, David. He said, yeah. I said, I want you to listen very carefully, because I want to say this once and I want to be sure you hear it. He said, yes. I said, David, we were married for 42 years. You left me. You left me for a woman I had trusted for 27 years. You did it because you wanted to. Nobody made you. You made a choice. That choice destroyed my marriage. That choice destroyed Richard's marriage. That choice destroyed a friendship that had lasted longer than most of your children have been alive. I said, you did not do it out of malice. I understand that. But you did it out of laziness. And laziness has consequences. I said, you are living, right now, in the consequences of that laziness. I did not put you there. Pamela did not put you there. You put yourself there. I said, and no, David, I do not have a job for you. I have built a company with a man you humiliated. That man is my business partner and my closest friend. The idea that I would hire you, in any capacity, is so laughable that I am going to hang up the phone now, because I don't want to spend another 60 seconds of my life on this call. I said, I hope you find some peace. I do. That's not sarcasm. But you are not going to find it here. I said, do not call me again. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table. My hands were shaking. But I was not sad. I was not angry. I was, for the first time in 5 years, free. Because I had, in that phone call, said the thing that women of my generation are trained our entire lives not to say. I had told a man who had once been my husband that he was not entitled to me anymore. Not to my time, not to my money, not to my career, not to my kindness. He was not entitled. Because the entitlement had been part of the deal we had made when we were 25 years old. And he had broken that deal on a Tuesday evening in September of 2019, when he sent Pamela Jennings a message saying he could not wait to see her that night. The deal was over. I did not owe him anything. Nothing at all. Pamela moved out of the house she shared with David 8 months ago. She is living back in her old East Grand Rapids house, the one she got in the divorce from Richard, with the reverse mortgage she took out to fund the new adventure. She cannot afford the payments. Richard hears occasionally from his son that she is trying to sell it. David is in a small apartment downtown. He is 73 years old. He is alone. I do not visit. I do not send Christmas cards. I do not participate in the ongoing narrative of their unraveling. I have my own narrative. Richard is now my closest friend on this earth. We are not romantic. We have discussed it, once, briefly, 3 years ago. We decided, mutually, without hurt feelings, that what we have is better than what a romance could offer us. We are business partners. We are best friends. We travel together. We had Thanksgiving at his son's house last year, and I had Christmas at Amy's house. We are, whatever it is, family. My 3 children have watched all of this with a specific mix of awe and confusion. Jennifer, my oldest, said to me at Christmas, quite, "You are a completely different person than the woman I grew up with." I told her, "No, sweetheart, I am the same person. I am just Moyle, for the first time in my life, the one who gets to decide who I am." I bought the lakefront house 3 years ago. It is exactly what I want it to be. Every wall, every window, every piece of furniture. There is no compromise anywhere in this house. There is no one else's taste. It is entirely mine. I have a golden retriever named Ellis. He is 4 years old. He sleeps at the foot of my bed. He is, if I am being honest, the great love of my current life. Legacy Memories now employs 67 people. We have preserved memories for over 15,000 families. I have personally sat with 342 widows and helped them organize their late husband's photographs. I have cried with most of them. I have laughed with all of them. Every single time when they hold the finished book, they say the same thing. They say, "Care, this is the best gift I have ever given anyone." and every single time, quietly, in my own head, I answer them. I say, yes, sweetheart. And it is the best gift I ever gave myself, too. I want to tell you something before I end this story. If someone in your life has left you, if a husband or a wife or a partner of many years has walked out the door and taken with them what you thought was your life, I want you to hear me. Your life did not walk out the door. Your marriage did. Those are different things. For 42 years, I confused those things. I believed that being David Mitchell's wife was my life, that the two things were the same thing, that if the marriage ended, the life ended. I was wrong. The marriage was one room of the house. The life was the whole house. And when David walked out of that one room, he left the rest of the house standing. He left the kitchen where I had raised my children. He left the garden I had planted with my own hands. He left the library of everything I had read, and the record of everything I had loved, and the muscles in my arms that had held babies and lifted grocery bags, and typed 30 years of school district correspondence. He left the mind that could still learn graphic design at 68. He left the heart that could still love Foy differently than before. But still, my children, and their children, and eventually a golden retriever, and eventually a business partner who had known the same pain and refused to be broken by it. He left, in short, me. I was still standing. I had been standing all along. I just for 42 years had been standing behind him. When he walked out, I had a choice. I could keep standing behind him, bitter, wounded, defined by his absence, spending the rest of my life being David Mitchell's ex-wife. Or I could step forward. I stepped forward. That is the whole secret. That is the entire lesson of my last 5 years. That is what I want you to hear. You were always going to have to step forward eventually. The question was only whether you would step forward while he was there or after he left. He left first. That was his mistake. Because the woman who steps forward alone, my darling, the woman who steps forward because she has to, because there is no one behind her to stand behind, that woman does not stop stepping forward, ever. She just keeps going. She builds a business. She builds a lakefront house. She builds a friendship deeper than anything a romance could offer. She builds, brick by brick, year by year, the built love Richard's grandmother told him about totaling. But she does not build it with a husband. She builds it with her own life. You cannot live in a hotel room, Richard said to me on that first night when we drank the wine. He was right. But he was not, it turned out, the only one who could not live in a hotel room. David and Pamela discovered that too. They tried. For 4 years they tried. And in the end, in the exact end I would have written for them if I had been permitted to write the ending, they discovered that a hotel room is not a home. A home is built. A home is earned, and you cannot steal a home. You cannot take one from someone else. You cannot walk out of one life and expect to walk into another one, fully furnished, waiting for you. You have to build. I built. They did not. That is the whole story. That is the whole difference. And that is why, 5 years after the worst evening of my life, I am sitting in a lakefront house at 72 years old, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, and thinking, with a kind of quiet, private gratitude I never expected to feel. Thank you, David. Thank you for leaving. You did me the greatest favor of my entire life, and you will never, in your remaining years, understand what that favor was, because you will still be looking for a hotel room, and I will always, always, always be home.